Hey everyone, how's it going? Today we're going to be talking about the best of the bunch. While I'm not sure when exactly that phrase originated, I mean Google AI returned a result, but the AI responses can be pretty iffy. It really isn't difficult to imagine where it came from. I imagine that it came from fruit pickers and farmers, probably banana pickers specifically. A group or cluster of bananas is called a bunch, and the ripest, most optimal banana would be the best of the bunch. Bringing that into a more broad sense, whenever there's a situation where there's multiple options or competitors, the winner or best option could be considered the best of the bunch. Now, the best of the bunch doesn't necessarily have to be good. It just has to be better than its direct competition. A banana may be the best of the bunch, but it could still be one of the worst ones harvested that day. Jumping right into our main subject for today, we have an aircraft that was indeed the best of the bunch, but that bunch was still pretty mediocre. It was an inferior bunch. This is arguably the best fighter of a competition that was ultimately unnecessary. This is the Gloster F.5 34, along with the Vickers Venom, the Bristol Type 146, and the Martin-Baker MB.2. Their collective stories begin back in the mid-1930s towards the end of 1934. Around that time, while the prospect of another world war was more in the back of some people's minds, militaries were still, as they generally always are, modernizing and attempting to get a leg up over their potential adversaries, and Britain wanted a new, more modern fighter aircraft with greater performance. Not at all coincidentally, in November 1934, Germany's Dornier Do 17 bomber took to the air for the first time, and had been in development for at least most of that year. Britain was aware of Germany's bomber developments, and with the Do 17 initially having a top speed above 200 miles an hour, this put the Royal Air Force in a bit of a pickle. If a war did start, German bombers were about as fast, if not faster, than a good number of British fighters and interceptors. With what Britain had at the time, they wouldn't be able to adequately defend against these faster bombers. So, to this new threat, the British Air Ministry would release Specification F.5 34, which called for a single-seat fighter with a top speed of at least 275 miles an hour at 15,000 feet, and an armament of preferably 8 .303 caliber machine guns, which at the time was a pretty exceptional armament. Additionally, the design would also ideally utilize an air-cooled radial engine, due to a preference in the British Air Ministry for radial engines as they are generally more rugged and easier to maintain. I should also mention over on Wikipedia, it mentions that this preference was due to wanting to use the design in more tropic regions, but when I checked out the source that was listed on that claim, I didn't actually find that it said that. Still though, I felt like it was worth mentioning at the very least, as it very well may have been part of the specs and initial intention for the design. Regardless to this specification, at least 4 companies would submit designs, and another design sat kind of on the periphery of it, which sounds odd, but I'll explain. To the specification, Gloster, Bristol, Vickers, and Martin-Baker would all design aircraft, and also Hawker designed a new fighter that almost fit the specification, but it had 4 guns instead of 8, and it used an inline engine instead of a radial engine. In essence, it was kind of part of the competition, and we'll come back to it later. But for the main competition, 3 of the 4 designs would all follow a very similar philosophy, stubby-looking low-wing monoplane with a radial engine. We'll look at them in the order that they took to the air, and the first to fly in June 1936 was the Vickers Type 279 Venom. This fantastically named aircraft was probably the most different of the three similar designs due to its engine selection. Measuring in at 7.37 meters long, 9.98 meters wide, and 3.28 meters tall, the Venom was a remarkably small and stubby low-wing monoplane with a pretty uncommon for military fighter aircraft rectangular wing. The Venom design was effectively an updated version of a failed Vickers design in the Type 151 Jockey. The main visual differences between the two were that the Venom had a greater wingspan, retractable landing gear, an enclosed cockpit, and a more powerful engine and a more aerodynamic engine cowling. Powering the Venom would be an all things considered actually kind of underpowered engine in the Bristol Aquila, weighing just 776 pounds dry and having just 625 horsepower, but due to the Venom's low gross weight of just 4,156 pounds, Vickers projected a top speed upwards of 320 miles an hour at 15,000 feet, which would be solidly above the requested 275 and well above the top speeds of Germany's new fast bombers, and with an armament of 8 303 machine guns, at least for the mid-1930s, the Venom was a pretty powerful fighter that would ideally serve very well against enemy bombers. And upon taking to the air on June 17, 1936, despite posting a top speed that was slightly less than anticipated at 312 miles an hour, its solid climb rate of 3,000 feet per minute, and solid maneuverability due to its smaller size and lesser weight, the Venom seemed to be a pretty promising aircraft. The second aircraft up to the plate would be our sort of main focus aircraft for today in Gloster's F.5 also simply known as the Unnamed Fighter. Measuring in at 9.75 meters long, 11.63 meters wide, and 3.1 meters tall, the comparatively larger fighter looked a bit more like a normal low-wing monoplane military fighter, as it had more rounded wings. Up in the nose, it was likely intended that the engine would be the Bristol Perseus radial engine with around 900 horsepower. From the images of the design, the F.5 was probably the sleekest and most attractive of the competition, with it looking, to me anyway, kind of similar to the A6M0. One interesting and notable feature of Gloster's design was in its landing gear. Instead of folding inwards towards the fuselage or outwards towards the wing tips and sitting flush within the wing, the landing gear instead retracted towards the tail and left about half of the wheels exposed. While this would increase drag a little bit, it also actually made emergency and crash landings a little bit safer. In this position, the wheels could still turn and actually bear the 5,400-pound gross weight of the plane. So if it had to make a gear-up landing, the wheels would still make contact with the ground and reduce the amount of contact the wings and body would make with the ground, thus making crash landings both safer and better for repairs. The exact first flight date of the F.5 seems to have been lost, but more than likely it took place sometime between May and December 1937. A very wide range there, but somewhere in there. At the time of its first flight, the Bristol Perseus engine was not available, and so as a replacement, the Bristol Mercury was selected instead. The Mercury was slightly less powerful than the Perseus, and also slightly smaller dimensionally speaking, so fitting it onto the plane was a very simple affair. Hitting a top speed of 316 miles an hour, it was slightly faster than the Vickers Venom, and presumably when the Perseus engine would become available, that top speed would increase even further. Combine this speed with excellent maneuverability and control, and an armament of 8 303 machine guns, it should be rather safe to say that Gloster's F.5 design was now the frontrunner. Third into the air was probably the least impressive design of the four in the Bristol Type 146. Measuring in at 8.23 meters long, 11.89 meters wide, and 3.15 meters tall, the Type 146 was in very broad strokes pretty similar to Gloster's F.5, and could kinda be viewed as an inferior, knockoff version of their design. Up in the nose, just like the F.5, the intended powerhouse would be the Bristol Perseus, and just like the F.5, the Perseus wasn't available, and so the Bristol Mercury was swapped in instead. Featuring a generally similar, if a bit stubbier, overall layout, the most significant difference between the Type 146 and the F.5 was probably in the landing gear. Instead of having the slightly protruding gear, the Type 146's gear would fold inwards towards the fuselage and sit flush within the wing, making the Type 146's gear a little bit more aerodynamic. Taking to the air on February 11, 1938, while the Type 146 did sufficiently meet the specs that was requested by F.5, it was easily the worst of the three that had taken to the air. In all fairness to it, it wasn't terrible, but for a fighter first taking to the air in 1938, it was inferior and kind of showing the age of its clearly older design. Hitting a top speed of 287 miles an hour, again, it was above the requested 275, and it did have 8 303 machine guns, but that performance put it in a clear third place, and possibly due to that lesser performance, when the Type 146 had a mishap later that year, the Air Ministry elected not to continue the project, making it the first of the 4 projects to be abandoned. Participating in an air show in May 1938, while taxiing, the Type 146 was accidentally driven into some kind of set piece, like maybe a display stage or something, and it was irreparably damaged, due both to its lesser performance and Bristol having to focus more on the Bristol Blenheim project. A second prototype was not pursued, and the project came to a swift end. For the last design of the competition to fly, Martin-Baker would save the most different design for last in their MB.2, measuring in at 10.59 meters long, 10.36 meters wide, and 2.97 meters tall. The MB.2 was a rather rectangular-looking low-wing monoplane with a cockpit that sat far behind the nose and slightly behind the wing. The overall design was made with ease of production and ease of maintenance in mind. A simple steel tube frame was covered by metal panels in the front and fabric in the rear. Also, the very fact that its frame was more boxy meant that it would be much easier to produce. Particular attention was paid to making things easier for mechanics and the ground crew, and not only was it easier to remove and work on the engine of the MB.2 than on any of the other designs, it was incredibly easy to access its 8 303 machine guns and its fuel tanks, and the MB.2 could be fully reloaded in just 5 minutes. The initial model MB.2 would also have fixed landing gear, but it is likely that any future model would have retractable landing gear. Powered by a Napier Dagger air-cooled inline engine, Martin-Baker predicted a top speed above 300 miles an hour. First taking to the air on August 3, 1938, it's as if the MB.2 in the air and the MB.2 on the ground were two completely different planes. On the ground, the ease of production and maintenance made it quite the attractive and appealing plane. In the air, though, it was pretty apparent that this was just the second aircraft designed by Martin-Baker, and they didn't have a lot of experience. Overall, pilots seemed to dislike flying the MB.2, noting a general lack of stability, finicky and sensitive flight controls, and poor control and handling of the machine guns. It did have a top speed of 305 miles an hour, which was quite solid, but alterations would need to be made to the plane's controls and control surfaces before the design could be seriously considered. So, by 1939, of the 4 aircraft in the competition, one of them, the Type 146, had already been eliminated, and in 1939, the Vickers Venom would too be dropped, leaving just the MB.2 and the Gloster F.5 34. Of these two, the Gloster design was pretty clearly the better option, it showing better performance and coming from a more experienced company that would be better equipped to fulfill a production contract. It was the best of the bunch, and yet neither it nor the MB.2 would receive a contract, and the whole of the F.5 34 project ended without any of the planes receiving a contract. So where then would a new RAF fighter come from? Well, let's circle all the way back to the start of the F.5 34 competition, where Hawker was working on a design that was kind of parallel to it. Hawker was working on a successor to their Hawker Fury biplane, and seeking out a higher performing and more modern aircraft, they set about designing what was then simply called the Fury monoplane. The initial rejected design, armed with 4 machine guns and powered by a Rolls-Royce Go-Shawk engine with around 600 horsepower, was further refined, and most critically, it was planned to be fitted with a Rolls-Royce PV-12 inline liquid-cooled engine. However, since this new design didn't use a radial engine, nor did it have 8 303 machine guns, it didn't actually fit the specifications for F.5 34, and upon the design being submitted to F.5 34, the Air Ministry instead created a new specification, F-36 34, specifically for it. Initial estimates put its top speed at 320 miles an hour, and Hawker would work much quicker than any of the other competitors, and their new design would take to the air on November 6, 1935. Hitting a top speed of 315 miles an hour, the initial flights of Hawker's design were overall decent enough. Not fantastic, but certainly not bad either. Pilots praised the design's overall solid flight characteristics and overall solid controls, but there were still some issues surrounding control at high speeds and some failures in the new PV-12 engine. But with that overall solid flight performance, a design that was considered to be easy to produce, and with an engine that, despite its growing pains, was looked upon favorably by the Air Ministry, Hawker's design, given the official name of Hurricane, was ordered into production on June 3, 1936, and its engine, given the name of Merlin, ended up being something of a World War II legend. So effectively, the F.5 34 competition was kind of over before the Vickers Venom took to the air. The Hurricane, despite technically not being part of the contest, won it before it could really get underway. Now, as countries typically field more than just one fighter design, this still left a very small window for any of the other F.5 34 planes, but that window would be slammed shut due to the development of a new plane by Supermarine, in what would be known as the Spitfire. Basically, by the time any of the F-534 planes got off the ground, both figuratively and literally, two of the most legendary British aircraft in World War II were either in development or in production. And because of that, the whole F-534 project was rendered pointless. Even for the best of the bunch of the F-534 project, in Gloster's unnamed fighter, it being the best of the bunch meant absolutely nothing, because when you compare one bunch to another, and 2 bananas on one bunch is better than 1 on the other, you choose the bunch with 2 bananas over the 1. And now I kind of feel like this whole analogy around bananas and banana bunches, I'm losing the plot. So let's just go ahead and end with a random banana fact that I can't confirm the truth of. The average American consumes 11 pounds of bananas per year. Alright, and with that, we're going to go ahead and end for today. So thank you all for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, personally, I absolutely do not eat 11 pounds of bananas per year. I feel like I maybe eat 4 bananas in total in a year because I'm a garbage disposal of a human being that eats terribly. But those 4 bananas that I eat in a year, I'll probably eat them within the span of maybe a week and then none the rest of the year, because that's typically how I eat foods. Eat a ton of one specific food in a short period of time, and then none for about the next year. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned something. So, see ya.